Welcome to another episode of Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven. Tonight's topic, mysterious disappearances in national state parks and forests, missing 411. I am your host, Spooky, and here is your other most awesome host, Raven.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good. It's snowing here.
I know, and it's been bloody cold up here. It's not even...
You got a deadly cold up there.
I know, it's killer cold. It's
Yeah.
minus sub weather. I feel bad for anybody who's out in this weather, anybody who's homeless, and especially the animals. And people, if you have pets that stay outside during the winter, please bring them in when it gets cold. Even keep them in a garage with a blanket or something, please,
Really.
It's too bad. It's just...
And feel sorry for me because I'm going to be out there shoveling it tomorrow.
Sorry. I don't mean to giggle at you having to do shovel work, but
Hey.
I know. Tonight's topic.
Yeah, tonight's topic was viewer's request, and although we may not get to your suggestion right away, we do make a note to check out every suggestion and try our best to get to them, along with our ever-growing list, excuse me,
What?
that Raven and I have between ourselves. I mean, we have been making a list ever since day one.
I know, we're almost... I don't know. There's I don't know. We're always bantering about so many things, and it's ranging in
Right.
a wide variety of topics. I mean, we don't just talk about paranormal. We talk like a bunch of different things all the time. And just because we talk about it doesn't mean we always believe in everything, but we do find things fascinating. And so we kind of wrote a bunch of stuff down. I mean, I have this notebook right here that I've been writing down show topics since we started, and we're almost in our second year. Come March will be our second year of doing shows, so we've been doing this for a while. But I mean, that notebook alone, we haven't even scratched the surface. We keep filling it up more and more, and I probably have over a year's worth of show topics alone, and I don't know. I've wanted to do a show on this for a long time too, since
Right.
we very first started. I mean, this is one of my first ones that I wanted to do because I found it kind of intriguing, but we've also had several, more than 2 requests for this topic as well, so I'm glad that we finally could get to it. And thank you guys for whoever did suggest it, and anybody else who has any ideas, feel free to message us and we'll write your topic down and look into it too.
Right, like I said, we may not be able to get to them right away, but we will eventually get to them. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about some disappearances, a bit on missing 411 books, and just share some random facts and the many theories and our own thoughts on tonight's topic.
Agreed. I mean, we're kind of going to talk about some of the I can't even talk. Statistics. Kind of dealing with numbers and whatnot.
Right.
Some facts and stuff. And then just kind of some of the things that we kind of ran into with what we were researching on. And then we'll go into the missing cases, read them down, because that'll take up over an hour or so just reading a bunch of the cases that we found. But I just want to state this, me and you spent a long time in researching this stuff and looking
Right.
over
Sure did.
many, many databases and really going as deep as we could. And the numbers of people missing, and just in one specific park or one state forest or whatever, and just the circumstances around it, and just not having any knowing of what happened. It was actually a really huge eye-opener for me, and it was kind of depressing at the same time because you feel awful for these families or whatever else. But
I had no idea until I really started researching this. I had absolutely no idea.
oh, I know. I mean, I know typically stuff can occur anywhere in the world, be it from your own backyard to wherever you go, but just I don't know. I just kept, it took me a long time to really formulate my thoughts of what I wanted to talk about tonight and which kind of cases to talk about. And to be honest, this may be a recurring show because there are so many cases that I think should be talked about. Maybe just for the sense to keep it in circulation. You know what I mean?
Right.
And don't let these people go into the darkness and never be heard about again, because maybe even talking about these cases might actually help solve some of these cases. But in the United States, Yeah, I think we have like 58 or 59 protected areas known as national parks. And I think there's like over 154 protected areas known as national forests that are operated by the National Park Service. You know, because we have like forests, you have deserts, you know, the mountains and wetlands. And you got
Right.
well over, I don't even know, I'm just saying like 80 million acres of protected wildlife, you know, beauty, attract, you know, all that nature stuff, you know, and
Right.
it attracts millions to visit them yearly. And,
Right.
and, you know, just in the past 100 years, several people have just vanished and they've just gone missing without a trace or a clue. And it kind of ranges, you know, just from really young children to even your experienced wilderness survivalists to the elderly. You know, it's a wide range of people.
Well, national parks, forests, and water reserves are scattered all across the United States. I think California has 9, Alaska has 8, Utah, I believe, has 5, and Colorado 4. Now, the largest national park is Wrangell St. Elias in Alaska, and that's over 8 million acres alone right there. It is larger than each of the 9 smallest states.
I know, that one's huge, you know?
Yeah.
But I love
I was amazed at that one.
I know. I think some of the, for the most part, you know, the top places that many of these families who come from urban cities and other countries, they tend to hit up Yellowstone, Grand Canyon's another big popular one for people.
Yosemite.
Yeah, that's another one that they usually hit up a lot of. But you know, there's some of the most visited areas, really.
Right.
And I read somewhere that Yellowstone had more than like 3 million visitors, I think, just in 2014. Now,
Wow.
and then I think Grand Canyon had like almost 5 million people go through there every year. And now, with this mass number of visitors every year, camping or traveling through these national parks and forests and wetland areas or whatever, I mean, it's not a surprise that someone doesn't get lost, you know?
Well, many who tend to visit these areas haven't really had a long background history in wilderness,
Right.
nor are they trained survivalists, but your average family from suburbia wanting to take in Mother Nature's beauty. I mean, these are a lot of these people that visit these parks. Now, not everybody,
Right.
but a lot of them are just people from cities wanting to get out and look at nature.
Right, to explore beyond what they've ever really experienced. But
Exactly, and some of them, you know, believe it or not, is their first time out of the city into a place like this.
right, I mean, I don't know. A lot of them, they go to these places thinking it's going to be just like a walk in the park, not really knowing the potential dangers that occur while being out in nature. I mean, even if you're staying at a campground, it's still built within the middle of the wilderness, and animals, specifically predators, are basically, what do you want to call them, kings there. You know, they even though you have a paved road to these little, you know, lined out lots, you still have to be aware of the dangers.
Well, you're stepping into their territory.
Oh yeah, I agree. And it's like, I think a lot of people don't understand, just because it's a national park or a state forest or a state park or a designated camping area, even in just a regular campsite in the wilderness,
Well, there are a
doesn't
lot
mean
of
that you're going to be safe. Animals are going to come and go. It's their territory. So
Right, and that's like, you know, they know nothing about wildlife. They'll see some of them, you know, like if they're lucky enough to see bear cubs, you know, they'll want to get as close as they can, thinking, oh, they're just so cuddly, and they don't realize that mama's going to tear them apart. A lot of these people not only go missing, there are a lot of injuries in these parks too.
right, like I said, during my research, and we do have photos, guys, too. We just have this one up for right now. But during my research, I did find on the net several reports from like old newspaper things on Google News. Now you don't have to go to the library or, you know, try to request old papers and stuff like that. Now you can find them all on the internet, which is kind of cool. But I also looked through old newspapers to missing databases, and it, like I said, it really opened my eye. And this one site, it was called NAMUS, the National Institute for Justice of National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. And I went to their website and I typed in national forests and parks, and just from those two keywords, it came up with over, just on national forest part, it triggered well over 888 cases just recently, you know. But you can also narrow it down to specific areas. You know, if you wanted to type in Yellowstone or this or whatever,
or Yosemite, Grand Canyon,
then the numbers just even go up higher in that. So I'm going to post a link in our YouTube description for anyone who is interested. They could go give because they also give like a lot of detail there with photos, and I think also maps showing in the area sometimes of where the people went missing and everything else. So I'm going to put a link to that website too in our YouTube description after the show. But
well, to let some people know, the NAMUS is what I call it. It's NAMUS, is a national centralized repository and resource center for missing persons and unidentified descendant records. Now, this site is a free online system that can be searched by medical examiners, coroners, law enforcement officials, and the general public from all over the country in hopes of resolving these cases.
yeah, Richard, Penny, can you write down those forest ideas or the ideas that the guys are asking, or they're posting in text for us so we don't miss it? I don't want to miss what they're asking us to do. I can't write it down right now, but you know, I also looked at the FBI website stuff for missing people, and then I also checked out this one site. It was called CANAM, Missing Project Site.
CANAM.
I know, I was just spelling out first people.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. But the number of people who go missing daily, to me, is just astounding. I think one study I did kind of come across, and I know a lot of people have mentioned this on other shows when they do a topic on this, but just in 2014, they say on average between 80 to 90,000 people are missing at one point in the USA at any given time. And this was gathered from that NAMUS site I was talking about.
Yeah, but now, of course, they aren't saying that all of these 90,000 people are never found. Many are. But there is a plethora of missing cases that are downright strange and mysterious, out of the normal incidents to why and how someone had gone missing, hurt, and found dead or alive.
Right. Now, we're going to get into talking about the missing people a little bit, but just kind of throwing out some of the serious stuff that we found first to kind of give you guys an idea of how things work when people go missing in the national forest, state parks, and everything else, and what kind of databases are out there and just everything else. But, you know, the CANAM Missing Project site, which is the CANAM, according to their website, it's basically a group of retired police officers and the SAR people, which is the search and rescue experts that do go out and do this stuff. A lot of these professionals have dedicated themselves to researching on, you know, scene of investigations and general understanding of these issues that are associated with people who do go missing in the wilds of North America. Now, this website is amazing, and I'm also going to put it in our YouTube description. I do want you guys to check it out, but, you know, they basically are saying that they're intensely working by following up, you know, 17 to 14 days after these cases are put away into the file cabinet. These guys will keep working at it and trying to discover what happened to these people. And, you know, they talk about, like, there's thousands of these SAR reports, and they're talking about dozens of victims, and they believe that there's, I don't know what I want to call it, paradigm? That's not the word I want to... There's a lot to this, and these guys are, you know, they've been there, they've worked on this stuff, and they don't think that there's enough done for these people who go missing.
I don't think so either after reading all of this.
So this website, they started as meeting, you know, it all started when they met with this one park ranger, and then it slowly evolved into this huge website studying on the missing people who vanished in the wild. And they all suggest that a lot of these cases are really under highly unusual circumstances, and they found that many of the cases that they researched parents and relatives of these victims believe a kidnapping had occurred. But the law enforcement and the media usually do not publicize these concerns of kidnapping and or abductions when these missing can be explained through traditional means. A lot of times they're like, oh, it's just this or whatever, But I don't know. I think people need to go check out this website too, because they're working really hard at trying to get more media and more responsibility held at these for national state parks and forests and stuff, that these people should be held accountable, that they should have, some more better systems at when this stuff occurs,
Right. Now, while we were doing our research, we also came upon hundreds of sites and YouTube videos, and all we're talking about missing 411 and the strange cases that are shared within Paulides books. Now, I'm not. It's Paulides.
Paulides, I think his name is, or whatever.
I think Paulides, yeah. David Paulides, as most of our listeners already know, is the author of Missing 411 series.
Right.
Now, excuse me. David is a former police officer turned investigative journalist and Bigfoot researcher. He founded and created the website North America Bigfoot Search.
Right.
Now, from what I have gathered from listening and reading on the net, David was doing some research in a national park when he was supposedly approached by an off-duty park ranger who began to share and express their concerns about certain questionable in nature missing person cases that had and were occurring in the parks. And knowing of David's background, he thought he could possibly help do some research into these cases. Now, David's interest piqued, and he agreed to look into it. And in doing so, when he discovered a few things, one he mentions a lot is there is an ongoing trend of clusters of missing people in United States national parks and forests.
Right.
And like Raven said before, they range from children, adults, and the elderly who disappear.
Right.
And oftentimes in the company of friends and family. Now, he states from his research that groups of people go missing in the same area have been occurring as far back as the 1800s. He often mentions in his books and in interviews that when he began to do his research into these cases, that he got stonewalled by many times by the National Park Services, and got attitude when he kept probing them about missing people and asking for reports and information regarding their cases. At which time he was told repeatedly that the National Park Service doesn't keep any records, documents, or track of these missing people inside their parks, their monuments, their forests, and so on.
Yeah, when he said that, at first I'm like, okay, is this guy just making this up? Is this legit? Or is he just doing this to sell books or whatever else? So, of course, me and you really like to research as much as we possibly can to get to as close as we can to the truth. You know what I mean?
Right.
I gotta quit reading chat because they're trying to make us laugh. But also on the Can-Am Missing Project site that I kind of mentioned, they made a statement that the federal agencies are actually harboring statistics, I don't know why I can't get that word out tonight, and reports on missing that need to be intensely studied and applied to the topic for future application. And they actually applied much of what they learned and documented in the missing 411 cases that you were kind of mentioning with his books and stuff. And they would encourage every SAR coordinator and manager to actually read those books, because they're actually putting in ideas and lists of what they think that they could better do when it comes to this issues.
Well, the National Park Service has continued with their policy of failing to keep track of a list of missing people inside their parks and monuments.
Right.
Now, David also mentions that the similarities of many of these cases seem to replicate in different clusters across the United States and Canada, as well as other countries. And he even mentions that there are missing children from these areas. They're not even listed on any national database.
I'm popping down chat. They're crazy. Don't look over there, Spooky. Since I was reading this stuff like you were saying or whatever, and I was a little reading about it. I mean, since his books came out, there have been, I saw on YouTube and all these other things, these several news channels that they themselves tried to ask the National Park Service for these documents, and they met with the same response that, hey, we do not keep any records. So, of course, I want to see for myself, I'm going to do a little digging and see if this is true. I'm not just going to go by, oh, this guy said this and this person said this, because, of course, it's the media. You're selling a book, you're selling a video, whatever. So we have the internet at the right here for us, so why not try and see if we can find it? Well, I couldn't find anything regarding the missing people, but here's the thing that I did find. When I went and tried to see if I could find any public information from the National State Parks and Forests, if they had any type of lists of numbers of people who were missing or who visited the park or whatever, and I found on their website, it's www.fs.fed.us, that they have something called the National Visitor Using Monitoring Results of the USDA Forest Service National Summary Report. And right. I'm going to post it on our YouTube description in the reference so you guys can go and check it out for yourself. But I read on this report, which was, the one that I did see was kind of like data collected from 2008 to 2012, that not only how many people visited, but what kind of activities they did there while they were there, and so on.
Well, they also know the percentages of race and where the people are from.
And their ages.
Right.
And according to this report, which it lists in a lot of great detail, and I'm just going to focus on just a number of people who visited, but not all the other things that they have listed, but according to the NVUM on that one summary, they had reports compiled from the most recent field data of the National Forest between 2008 and 2012 that they had over 160 million recreation visits to National Forest. And then, which was they even had from 2005 to 2009, which is 155.8 million, and from 2006 to 2010, 157.1 million, and 2011, 159 million. But they also had an additional information of knowing that they had over 300 million occasion of people just traveling on the scenic byways and routes near the forest land. And the fact is, if they know where they were visiting, how many people were there, what kind of activities they did there, they had all this detailed report of all this stuff. But why do they not keep records of missing people through the years that occurred in these state parks and forests? Why do they have all this detailed information about everything else, from what kind of vehicle somebody drove, how long they stayed somewhere, what activity they did there, from what they ate for lunch practically, from different ages, races, where they came from, what country they came from? Why is all this free for us to know, but they don't keep any records of missing people? I thought that was really weird.
It is. It's very, very strange. But see, David does mention in his interviews, and I think also his books, that at one point while talking to the NPS, that they told him that they didn't keep track of missing people. They didn't have a list of names, dates, or any numbers regarding how many people are still missing. Now, the NPS followed that with essentially the same statement about their entire system. 183 locations. Now, David requested this information under the Freedom of Information Act.
Right.
And he was met with rejection, rudeness, and at one point was finally told that if he wanted any list, that it would cost him unrealistic amounts of money to access. Now, going back to what you just said, why on earth do they supposedly not keep track of these missing cases, but they can have detailed reports open for the public on their websites of millions who visit and what they do there? You know, if they so much as just wade in a pool or something, these people know it.
Right. I don't know. It's kind of BS.
And yeah, and for how long? But they can't share or keep track of something that's far more important, like missing people ranging in age from little children to the elderly.
Yeah.
I smell BS.
A little bit, yeah.
A lot of it. A whole farm of bulls. But victims' families are left without closure, and the Park Service refuses to follow up or keep any sort of national list and or database of the missing.
Right. If they can spend, because they said, well, we don't have the manpower, we don't have the time, or we can't do this kind of stuff. But to me, it'd be easier to keep track of all the missing cases because that's.
Well, you would think so.
Because
It's
to
less
me, that
paper.
would be a lot less
Work.
number, I would hope, than the work that they actually put into this graft and this detailed report that we'll have listed in our YouTube thing. But you know what? I wanted to call BS on this news media and this guy in this book saying, yeah, the national forests don't do this and that, whatever. But the fact is, you know what? These people were telling the truth. And, you know, another reason why we're kind of bringing this up is because maybe people need to bring this up more of attention to make these people a little bit more liable for this specific reason. Not, who cares how many people peed in the one toilet on the left parking lot, you know? I don't care. Or, you know, but that they had details
Well, it
almost
depends
like
on
that.
how far back in line you are.
But it's kind of like in a part in the stinking reports. That's why I was like, this is dumb. But there's
I think they do it because it's not good for business.
I don't know. But there's a time that, you know, in this Mr. Paulides, David's books, you know, he was the only one who, I guess, at the time that I could find, was the only one really researching deeply into this. And as far as I know, but he found like over 52 geographical clusters of missing people in North America alone, just by doing his first ongoing research for the first book. And at this point, from what I was discovering on the net and from the lack of help and the aid from the NPS, I really don't think he's going to ever actually receive the answers he's looking for.
I don't think so either.
And as far as the NPS, it doesn't seem to me, the National Park Service, people don't know what that means. I don't really think they kind of care about people. And to quote one blogger that I kind of read on the internet, you know, he said, until this David can actually talk to one of the survivors that is coherent and can actually tell the facts of their incident, or the NPS, until he can really get this information out there, the NPS can keep on being quiet.
Right.
But, you know, the national park and forest was set up to protect land that was procured by the federal government as collateral to kind of like secure U.S. debt. And it was kind of under the guise of, it's all about caring about nature and monuments, but it's because of this land banking. And it in a way, it also allows them for housing and warehousing weapons or ammunition or equipment, or as some people claim, like secret bases, you know. But until more people come together and unite to get this information open for the public freely, I think it will be continued to operate in this fashion as far as they have it set up. And many people's lives, you know, could end up like these cases we're going to mention really soon here. These missing cases we're about to talk about, you know?
Yeah. I believe I read somewhere that there currently is a petition to the U.S. Department of the Interior to improve tracking of missing people. And we are going to share some stories that we came across, some well known and others are not.
I'm sorry, Doppel got me. Go see what Doppel wrote. You know, Spooky and I both did some digging to try to find some cases that deal with the oddities that don't match with the easily explained. And like I said, I was honestly kind of shocked how many I kept running across just by searching through newspapers and online. And hopefully these photos are large enough for people to see, I hope. But, you know, I just kept running across so many things, and there's just so many that I wanted to talk about, but there's no way we could cover all of these in one night, or even maybe in, I don't even know, this show could go on forever with all the cases, of the strange cases that are going on, you know. But why don't you go ahead and first share one of the well-known odd ones, you know?
Okay, I think I will. Paula Jean Weldon. Now, this is a cold case that is over 60 years old. In fact, this case is 70 years old. Now, Raven and I touched on it for a bit in an earlier show about mysterious triangles in the United States at the time. I'm getting tongue-tied. It's contagious. At the time, I didn't realize just how involved her story is. Now, while this is an unsolved cold case, this particular case is still active. On December 1st in 1946, Paula Weldon, who was an 18-year-old sophomore at Bennington College in Vermont at the time, she had worked 2 shifts at the college dining hall. Now, she went back to her dorm and changed clothes, and she informed her friend and roommate, Elizabeth Johnson, that she was going to take a break from studies and take a long walk. Now, according to Johnson, Paula was dressed in a red coat with a fur collar, jeans, and lightweight sneakers. And she left the dorm room around 2:45 in the afternoon. Now, you have to consider that this was winter in Vermont. And she was either underdressed for a walk in the woods, or she just did not plan to be gone very long. Now, when Paula didn't come home that night, Johnson assumed that she was studying in the library, but when morning came, Johnson began to get very worried, so she informed college authorities. Mm-hmm. Well, the college president, Lewis Webster Jones, called her parents to see if she went home for the weekend.
Right.
Now, upon hearing of that their daughter was missing, her mother collapsed and had taken to her bed, and her father immediately left for Bennington to organize a search for Paula.
I can't make it too big here.
And upon reaching Bennington, he immediately organized a search group ranging from local residents to students from both Bennington and Williams colleges. Mm-hmm. Now, classes at Bennington were suspended so the students could join the search if they chose to do so. Mm-hmm. The only thing that they really had to go on was a small timeline. Mm-hmm. Like 2:45, she left the dorm to take a walk. Shortly after that, Danny Fager, who was the owner of a gas station across the street from the college gates, claimed he saw a blonde, slight young woman in a red coat run up the side of a gravel pit that was near the college gates, mm-hmm. then ran down the other side, disappearing from his view. Mm-hmm. And later, while they were searching for Paula, they had a bulldozer sift through the gravel on the chance that Paula became buried alive, but nothing was found.
Well, because she wasn't there, but yeah.
Right. Excuse me, I'm having a little problems with my throat this evening. Now, around 3 p.m., Lewis Knapp of Woodford picked up a female hitchhiker matching Paula's description. Now, he said when she climbed into his truck, she slipped and he told her to be careful. She told him she was going to the Long Trail.
Right.
And she never said another thing until he reached his driveway, which was about 2.5 miles from the trail, and she thanked him and she got out of his truck and started toward the trail. Now, they say roughly 45 minutes later in Bickford Hollow, several residents reported seeing her heading toward the trail. And Ernie Whitman, who was a watchman for the Banner, which was a local newspaper, had even spoken to her. Mm-hmm. And he warned her about walking in the mountains so lightly dressed and at such a late hour.
Oh, right.
Right. Well, wintertime, night comes early. But she still headed for the trail anyway and out of sight forever. Now, by the evening of December 2nd, all of these students became frustrated with what they called incompetent search by local authorities and shared their frustrations with Mr. Weldon and Mr. Jones. So Mr. Weldon, who was a well-known engineer in Connecticut, mm-hmm. used his influence to call in the state police from New York and Connecticut, mm-hmm. because at the time, Vermont did not have its own state police, so this search was disorganized and lacking in resources.
So chaotic in a sense.
Yeah, really. Mm-hmm. Now, Vermont did have a state investigator by the name of Almo Frazzoni. Uh-huh. He was put on the case within days of Paula's disappearance. So Frazzoni and representatives from the New York and Connecticut State Police took over the search, and the student volunteers then switched their focus to fundraising. And they managed to raise $5,000 reward for information. Now, back in 1946, that was a lot of money.
Right.
But for all their efforts, no evidence was found. Nothing. In fact, the only thing that kept them pursuing the case were the small, tantalizing, and sometimes strange leads that came in, like a waitress in Fall River, Massachusetts, claimed that she served an agitated young woman matching Paula's description. Well, Mr. Wheldon felt this lead was promising, so he went to check it out without telling anyone where he was going. And 36 hours later, when he returned to Bennington, he found that he himself was a prime suspect in his daughter's disappearance. Because according to Elizabeth Johnson, Paula didn't go home for Thanksgiving as expected.
Right. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Excuse me.
I was going to give you a chance to get a drink of water, but agree with you and make a little thing, but go ahead.
Okay, instead, she called her parents to say she was staying in Bennington, and also, according to Johnson, Paula and her father had a falling out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this left Paula quite depressed. So Mr. Wheldon came up with the theory that a boyfriend came to see Paula, and he too could be a suspect. But he couldn't come up with any proof, and other people had even claimed that Paula didn't date much because, you know, there was a little theory that maybe she ran off with a boyfriend.
Yeah, so but these are all theories that they were trying to speculate or just make up.
Right, they were just speculation.
To throw people off or to give reason to why they only searched for a few days and that's it. But
that's true. And Mr. Wheldon did claim that a clairvoyant in Paulides insinuated that a man was involved. So I guess that's why he came up with that theory. But on December 16th, Wheldon packed up Paula's things and returned to Connecticut. Before he left, he really blasted Vermont for its lack of a professional police force. And he even criticized the irresponsibility of those leading the search and their failure to keep records of the first 10 days of the search.
Or any really records, period. That's
really,
the thing.
they didn't keep...
ongoing problem for a while. Still
right.
is.
Well, this fact was not overlooked by all the reporters from New England who were in Bennington to cover the story. Mm-hmm. And all the bad press led to the creation of the Vermont State Police by a legislative session in 1947. This is the only good that came from Paula Wheldon's disappearance. And after Mr. Wheldon and the reporters and everyone else left, mm-hmm. there were a few who did keep looking. But in January, the weather was so harsh that they found the search hopeless and just gave up.
Right.
And they felt that by this time, Paula's body and any evidence was covered by the deep snow.
Right.
So the case remained unsolved for 13 years. And then a skeleton was found near Adams, but analysis proved that the skeleton was too old to be Paula's.
Yeah, it
Makes you
wasn't
wonder
hers.
how many people go missing there in Adams.
Well, but here's the thing. When we did that show on the Bennington and Bridgewater Triangle, I mean, there were several cases just in that area
right.
alone of really bizarre disappearances, to the pugwudgies, to paranormal activity,
right.
to serial killers, to the occult connections in there.
Right.
It was just a bunch of stuff when it came to Bridge. So she wasn't the only
she
case
wasn't
here.
the only one.
But they had Bigfoot sightings there, to ghostly activities, to UFOs and everything else. I mean, and it's still going on over there in the Bridgewater and Bennington Triangle area. So she's not the only bizarre case when it comes to this area.
But after the Adams skeleton was discovered, new theories and suspicions did begin to arise about Paula. That, you know, like I said before, she ran off with a boyfriend. She died from exposure. Even the paranormal was considered to be a factor.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of the paranormal, one theory was raised by New England author Joseph Citro, and we mentioned him in the show before, and he's the man who coined the term Bennington Triangle. because the long trail and all of this was in the Glassberry area and in the Bennington Triangle.
Yeah.
Now, it's I'm getting tongue-tied again. This is a term that's used to describe an area in southwestern Vermont where 5 people, including Paula, disappeared between 1945 and 1950. And Citro links these disappearances to a special energy that inhabits the Glassberry wilderness, and supposedly this energy attracts visitors from outer space. Woo!
What?
Oh, yeah. And these visitors most likely abducted Paula as well as the 4 other missing people.
That's an interesting theory. I wonder if we should...
That's a very interesting theory. And we did mention Joseph Citro.
I thought we did on that one show.
Yeah, in the other show. But what happened to Paula Jean Weldon? I mean, over 60 years ago. Might as well say 70.
Right.
Suicide.
I don't think it was suicide or any of that.
Did she run off with a boyfriend? Was it murder? Or was she snatched away by visitors from outer space?
To that one guy's theory, yeah. But there was a lot of things that... A lot of people are randomly disappearing. And there were a lot of murders happening there, too.
Yeah, in this same area, 5 people, like I said, including Paula, disappeared between 1945 and 1950. That's only 5 years. Technically, this case is still open.
Right.
After all these years.
But wasn't she the one that went... No, who's the one that went walking with their friends in the same area? They couldn't find her. And then they searched over the whole area, and then they found her clothes folded up nicely on the path.
I don't remember. Off the top of my head, I don't remember.
I thought it was her.
Could have been. I don't know.
Because I thought they didn't find her body in the clothing.
According to the story I read, Paula went off walking alone.
Yeah, there must have been another female case because it's ringing in my head that has to do with the Bennington and Vermont area in this national forest park area.
She was one of the cases, but she wasn't Paula.
Yeah.
But like I said, technically the case is still open, and we will probably never know. But a little side note, even though this is a very old unsolved cold case, it is technically an open and active case. And this is due to the fact that the disappearance of Paula Jean Weldon is the reason the Vermont State Police was created, and the case is now in their hands.
Right. But I think why this is probably in my head, because this happened in the same area around her.
I think it was another missing person in that area.
Around the same area where she was, or whatever, but there was a lot of people who did go missing for multiple reasons here in this area. But, I mean, there was a couple oddities that seems to be repeated in multiple national forests and state parks and stuff, where they're finding people's clothing in perfect condition, and it's like folded, like, some people, their theory was like they were zapped out by a alien's beam.
Yeah, they were zapped out of their clothes
and stuff like that. And I'm not making fun of any of this, because there's a possibility for everything when it comes to these oddities, because there's so much. Like I said, if you got everybody in one room and they told their truths and their stories of what they've experienced, it would alter the reality of everything that we've already been told to believe or
one thing should be noted, that in the Bennington Triangle, and I do remember this, none of those 5 people were ever found, and they found absolutely nothing of Paula Weldon.
No, not even a trace.
And the reason that her case is so famous, and the reason I chose her case, was one, we had mentioned her before on our Bennington Triangle show.
Yeah,
and
that
the second one is that hers is the case that caused the creation of the Vermont State Police.
Which should be noted, but her and other cases in that area, like I said, we could go on for days with all this stuff that we want to do, and this may be a reoccurring.
And I just paraphrased her case, as long as that was that I just said, and I know I got a little windy.
But we had to shorten it up a little.
That's nothing. I paraphrased it because her case was very, very much involved.
Yeah, her and another one that you're going to talk about tonight could have just been a whole show on itself, but...
Right. There, some of the people that I'm going to mention, and Raven, we could do a case, we could do an entire show on them.
Right. But like I said, we might do several of these because there's so many strange cases, and I wanted to do a heck of a lot more than what we kind of wrote up. So we'll probably have multiple cases of this, and not just here in the United States, but we noticed in other countries having
Oh yeah, all around the world.
similarities and stuff. But is it okay if I do one now?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm done.
Be done. It's my turn. No.
I'm done.
This one I'm sure people have heard about before too, but this one I thought was really weird. But her name was Thelma Pauline Melton. Now, I found this case, again, to be one of those where the person was with friends and she just vanished. Because there's a lot of cases where somebody's walking with somebody and they just disappear right in front of them. Now, this was on September 25th of 1981 in the Great Smoky Mountains of National Park, Tennessee. And Thelma and her two friends went hiking on the popular Deep Creek Trail in the national park, while her husband stayed back at the campground in their Airstream trailer. Now, Thelma was 58, and she was overweight and had high blood problems, but was very familiar with these trails because her and her husband had been hiking them for 20 years. So she already had prior knowledge, if not knew about them like the back of her hand. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Now, she kind of prepped the evening sauce for their meal that night and took a short nap. And then, after that, that's when her and her two friends decided they were going to go on this short, brisk hike. And all she had on her, besides her clothing, was a pack of Virginia Slims. So while they were hiking and stuff, I guess it occurred somewhere around like 4 p.m. is when they decided that they were going to start to hike back to the campground. And that's when everything went strange. Now, at one point, Thelma began to walk ahead of her friends a bit, and at which time her friends kind of made this comment about her pace. And Thelma, who was about 75 yards ahead of them, they said she turned around and kind of smiled and laughed a little bit, but then just kept going. And they watched her walk over the crest of this hill on the trail, and she just was out of their view. Well, when they came over the hill, they didn't see her, so they just assumed that she had already returned to the campground or was in the direction ahead of them and was already there. Well, it was around about 4:30 p.m. according to these different sites and the missing sites that I was reading, that her friends got back around 4:30, but Thelma wasn't there at the campground or at the camper. So at one point they kind of waited a little bit, and then her husband went back with one of her friends and they retraced the entire route that they had taken, and they didn't find anything of Thelma at all. Not a shoe, not a trace, not any evidence where she could have went or disappeared to. And it was said at that time she was then reported to the missing persons to the park ranger around 6 p.m. And if you look on the map, the campground and the park ranger station aren't that far apart. So they were like right near the campground, so they could get right on to looking for her. Well, that evening, it was like 6 p.m., so it's almost 2 hours about the time when the park rangers came in and started to look for her. Well, it was kind of like a 15-man search party, and they had dogs searching for 5 days and everything, and they didn't find a single trace of her or anything. And it was by Thursday that the group of men was cut down to 2/3, and I think the park ranger's name was like Dennis Burnett. Now, he made a statement that he said that they had 3 tracking dog teams, and they're like really good, and they've helped them find many people, but these dogs hit on absolutely nothing. They said there was no sign of any scuffle or for foul play or any signs of anything where there could have been an animal attack or anything. There was nothing to explain why she just disappeared when she went over the hill, and her friends, when they came up, they should have still seen her. But she was just gone, like she vanished. And they basically ended up, I don't know why they do this, but this happens in multiple cases where they just search for 5 or 6 days and then they call it off and end it. So they ended the search that Friday, and it was said by some newspapers and that the rangers on the basic route patrol would just keep an eye or a lookout for any signs of her. But they weren't going to do any searching for her anymore. They just said, if we see something odd, then we'll see her. If not, we're not going to go out of our way to kind of look for her, which seems odd why these cases keep doing that. But Thelma and her husband, Robert, I mean, they visited this park every year, every summer, and they camped at that Deep Creek campground every summer. And, you know,
so they were really familiar with it.
She hiked those trails for 20 years. I mean, it was like her backyard. And, you know, Thelma has not been seen or heard from since she walked over the crest of that hill. No one, as far as we know, me and you, from what we could do our research with, knows what happened to her. And now she's still listed as missing and in danger. Now, there are various theories ranging from this with this story too, like what you were reading about the other one, where she became disorientated and she became lost. That's what the rangers are trying to say. Or, you know, she killed herself right there in the woods. Or they said that she ran away because somebody speculated maybe she was having an affair. Well, that had nothing. Thelma had nothing on her person except for a pack of cigarettes, you know? So she had no identification, she had no money, she had nothing. She didn't have any indication or show any indication that she was going to run away, that she was suicidal, or any of that stuff. You know, she was keeping up with her basic routine that she always does. So there was no sign of why this would be.
She's gonna have an affair and run away after 20 years of hiking that trail. It took her 20 years to scout out that trail to find the best way out of that park, or what?
I don't know, but listen, it's another of these many cases I stumble upon on the net of people just vanishing right in front of other people or being around with other people, and then there not being any single trace or shred of evidence to what happened to them. And with this case, we may never know, but they searched. They had all these dogs, they did everything. And like they said, there was absolutely no, like if you walk off the path and you're walking through the brush and the thicket and everything else, anybody who's in nature knows this, you leave a trail. All
right.
Animals do, and people do too. People more lazier because we'll break branches, you'll snake something, you leave a scent. These animals can track a missing person in a city with everybody else's scent and stuff there, but they could never find or hit on anything when it came to Thelma. There was nothing. It was like she went over the hill and poof, I don't know, did she walk into a portal? Did somebody snatch her? I don't know. There's all these different theories that everybody's saying. We don't know. We're not going to influence anybody in saying, hey, it's spooky. We're not going to. It could have been aliens. Some people say that. People say Bigfoot did it. People say, you know, she stepped in a portal. People say that she ran away. People say she committed suicide. But if she ran away, it's been so many years. By this point, she would have made contact with somebody in her family. You know what I mean?
That slipped out.
I know. It happens. You have health issue. But the thing is, with Thelma, this is one of those strange cases that make absolutely no sense. She only had her pack of cigarettes.
How long did they look for her?
5 days.
5 days. That was it. 5 days, and they came to all these conclusions.
Yeah, it's just, she had nothing on her, and if she did run off to having an affair, at some point, somebody would have spotted her, somebody would have talked to her, and this case would have been resolved. If it was suicide, at this point, at this time, somebody would have came across her bones. The animals would have hit on it fairly quickly. If she was kidnapped, her friends weren't that far behind her. You would have heard screaming. You would have seen some type of struggling mark on the path or into the wilderness. This is just one of those things that just is strange, and nobody knows what happened to this woman. And that's my one case. So I'll let you pop on your other because we have a whole lot to do. So that's why we're kind of.
Can we please take a break right now?
Oh yeah. Okay.
I really need to.
We're going to take like a quick 3-minute break, guys, and we're going to return, and then we're going to finish all these odd cold cases that we have and banter with different theories and ideas and what have you. We are going to probably be over 2 hours tonight, but thank you guys for coming. Please stay with us and share us with others, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Anything But Ordinary. I'm your host, Raven, and hopefully Spooky's back with us.
Yeah,
I know
I'm back.
I know you haven't been feeling well, so I know the medication with your cold and everything's kind of messing you up, but
Yeah, it sure is.
we apologize. But when you're sick,
That was a
you
good
can't
one,
help
though,
it.
wasn't it?
Yeah, when you're sick, you can't help it. So
That's true.
I think I was talking about Thelma and stuff, but I was kind of mentioning her, but I know we're kind of speeding through these cases, but we have a lot of stuff, but we're going to kind of go over our 2 hours, guys, but I just want to say thanks, guys, for coming here, and please stay with us, and why don't you go on to your next case if you want, Spooky?
Okay, James Randall Randy Morgenson. Now, he was a park ranger. This is a story that we could do an entire show about, but unfortunately, in the time given, I have to paraphrase this story. Now, Randy Morgenson was a 64-year-old backcountry ranger at Sequoia Canyon National Park in northeastern California. Now, he was in top physical condition and more than capable of performing his duties. He had been a seasonal ranger at this particular park for 28 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Randy grew up in Yosemite National Park, where he lugged around a heavy tripod for the famous photographer Ansel Adams. And if you've ever heard of Ansel Adams, he was famous for his photos of national parks. Randy joined the Peace Corps, and while stationed in India, he learned high altitude mountaineering from the Sherpa. And he had been a winter ranger in Tuolumne Meadows and a Nordic ranger at Badger Pass. So this is a man who knew the mountains well. And he wasn't a novice. I mean, this was a guy that knew his job. And
Right.
according to Randy's former supervisor, Randy was the one to call when someone went missing in the wilderness.
Right.
He said that Randy was so in sync with the mountains that when someone went missing, he could look at a topographic map of the terrain, and starting at the point of the person's last known position,
Yeah.
Randy could pinpoint where that person would be found with uncanny accuracy.
That's the guy you want on the SAR team when someone goes missing.
Right, exactly. Now, on the morning of July 26th in 1996, Randy loaded his backpack, pinned on his badge and his name pin, and closed the door to the station, and then left to go on his routine patrol. He was a foot ranger.
Right.
They had different positions, water ranger,
Rankings and stuff, yep.
air ranger,
Yep.
foot ranger. Randy was a foot ranger.
Right.
Now, after 4 days, with no radio contact from Randy, a search and rescue team, an SAR, was formed. Now, the team was joined by Randy's close friend and fellow ranger, George Durkee. And the search began at Randy's station, but unfortunately a storm with heavy rain had passed through and washed away all footprints around the station, so the team couldn't see what direction Randy had taken. And also Randy's gun was locked up, but that wasn't unusual because Randy didn't like carrying it and was not sure if he could shoot another human even in self-defense.
Right. I'd still bring something in the nature, though. That's
I'm
just
sure
me.
he had something. For years, Randy had been upset with the National Park Service because he believed that they were not doing enough to preserve the national parks and very little on improving the facilities. And this was an opinion he verbally expressed frequently. Now, according to Durkee, Randy was depressed. He was not only upset with what he deemed as neglect of the MPS,
Right.
but Randy and his wife were divorcing because Randy had been carrying on an affair with a female ranger for years.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we're not going in great detail with that, but anyway.
About wildlife.
Shh. Spooky.
And if that wasn't enough, he and that ranger had just broken off their relationship.
Oh,
So-
after. So it wasn't ongoing anymore,
Right.
according
right.
to this stuff you're reading. Okay.
But so suicide was a plausible theory, but foul play also had to be considered because the season before, on two separate occasions, Randy reported feeling threatened by an angry climber and a cowboy.
What?
And
He's pissing a cowboy off and a hiker?
I know you don't piss off a cowboy.
I know that. Or
both of whom he had run-ins with during the season. Now, nearly 100 personnel searched 80 square miles of rugged, high-altitude wilderness, and a special investigator was assigned to the case, and he learned of the suspicion by some who believed that Randy had hiked out of the mountains to start a new life. But most believed, though, that he was seriously injured and was unable to call for help because of the unreliable radio system, which was another one of Randy's career-long complaints with the MPS. Now, as the Rangers and friends joined the search, each tried to guess which direction Randy had taken. They read his logbook. They used SAR dogs, and SAR stands for Search and Rescue. They used helicopters, and they used any method that they could think of with no results. And so pretty soon they all began to fear the worst, but some held out hope that they would find Randy alive.
well, because he was so he knew he was really trained for this.
Exactly. This was not a guy that just, would just wander off and get lost. I mean, he had a regular patrol he took, and he had worked in these mountains for 28 years, so
Right.
he knew them.
Right.
The search and rescue dogs would follow scents that just suddenly disappeared. Now, pieces of gear were found, but they could not be conclusively linked to Randy.
Well, right. It could have been any other hiker in the woods.
Exactly. And an NPS criminal investigation team found Randy's car right where he had parked it. They even checked his checking account and his credit card, and they showed no withdrawals or charges. And this was, I guess they checked those on the chance that maybe Randy did just hike out of the mountains to start a new life. But as the days passed, this search just became hopeless. The use of psychics was even being considered. Now, most of the Rangers believed that Randy would never be found, while others pledged to never quit searching until they knew the truth. And just when the search effort seemed really hopeless, they found a vital clue.
What'd they find?
Now, what'd they find? Well, I'll tell you.
Well, that's why I'm here. Tell me. I want to hear.
Tell
So do the listeners.
Don't get me laughing, please.
I'm not. I'm just.
A group of searchers were making their way up a slippery gorge when something caught their attention. It was a weathered backpack that was just, it was like it was cast aside to the side of a rushing torrent of water below a waterfall. Now, they also saw a boot halfway submerged in the water and something white protruding from the boot. And when they got down there to look, the white thing was a leg bone.
Oh.
Now, the boot and the backpack matched the description of the gear Randy was reportedly using. And soon after, someone found a park-issued radio that was turned on. And the thing about this was that instead of being at the bottom of the waterfall, this radio was found sitting on top. And like I said, it was turned on. So they speculated that Randy was either monitoring the rescue, or, which was unlikely because radio communications were notably unreliable, or he was trying to call for help. So with these findings, the case was closed, and the question of what happened to Randy was answered, but for some, one question still remained, though. Was it an accident or suicide? And only Randy could answer that. Now, it should also be noted that the rest of Randy's remains were not found until July of 2001, which was nearly 5 years later. So the final report stated that he most likely fell through a snowdrift, broke his leg while crossing a creek, and died of his injuries and hypothermia. And his remains were washed down the creek into this small cascade where they had been hidden in the rocks for years.
Here's the weird stuff. When you start to try to find the autopsies on the reports of these cases, they weren't drowned. Bodies will be found in water, but the cause of death is not because they drowned or anything else either. There's weirdness to a lot of this stuff, but so this guy, he was, he knew what he was doing. I highly doubt he would have walked onto a river without poking it with a stick, because you pretty much know this when you're 20-some years into this service and being into the wilderness. You know about this type of things. You know that sometimes if it snows, it can cover over a little pocket of flowing river, and you don't just walk over it, because there could be a good chunk where you have this free flowing water, because it kind of traps like a heating thing between the water and the fresh snow where it melts the ice. Now I'm not a professional and I know this. Obviously he would know this. I think they just speculated this and theorized this because of where they found him, but nobody really knows what happened to him. And the way that, with the case of his body and the injuries and stuff like that, it's just like all they could do was like, well, we'll just assume that he died of hypothermia and that he probably fell through a creek crossing. But they didn't know, and they still couldn't really tell. And a lot of these rangers didn't agree with the cause of death. And this is one of those things that they were upset with, and they felt like they were just trying to brush it under the rug and move on with it.
Well, I found nothing in this story where they had done DNA on that leg bone, so I'm wondering how they even knew that was Randy, except for the park issued radio. That's the only thing that could really be evidence that it was him. Now, but they didn't find the rest of him for 5 years.
Well, right. A lot of this...
But they didn't look for him very long, and I guess they just assumed after they found all of this stuff that they found him. And really, if you stop and think about it, though, on this one, he was in disagreement with the MPS, and he had been for years, okay? And then he had an affair that was recently broke off, and his wife was divorcing him. Suicide is plausible, but maybe he was so distracted that he wasn't paying attention to what he was doing because he had all of this on his mind.
That's always a good possibility, but when you read about this case more and more of just what we said, there's more out there too. It is one of those odd ones again. It seems odd how they quickly just assumed and rushed it and said that's it, and how a lot of other rangers have issues with the conclusion of the report of his death and everything else. So it's just one of those other oddities that we were throwing up, but there's we found that he's not the only ranger. There was several rangers who have gone missing and their bodies were never found, or they were never found. Right. And there's also several game wardens that disappeared too, under really unusual, weird circumstances.
And you're talking about professionals here that went missing. These were not just your average citizen, or a hiker or a professional wilderness person. This guy had 28 years at this park, but he had done other parks too, so you might as well figure he probably had 35, 40 years in with the Park Service, so this man knew his job.
Right, but he's not the only park ranger or game warden that disappeared, like we're saying. But I'm going to go on to our next case here. Gerald Joseph Williams. Now, Gerald and about 20 other his family members and friends were camping in this remote campsite. And, I can't even say that word. Kaibab. Kaibab. I don't know why I can't read tonight. National Forest. Now that's just north of the Grand Canyon, and it was in August of 2015. Okay, so it was just this summer. Now on Thursday, August 6th, he was basically chasing butterflies and grasshoppers while his mother was following right behind him, and he basically disappeared about 100 yards away from the campsite. Now, he was right in front of his mother. She, like, turned her head for, like, a second and turned back, and he was gone. And this was, like, around 2:30 p.m. And, you know, of course, all the friends in the family were screaming and hollering for him and out looking for him, and he never once responded back to any of their calls or anything. And they searched for him, and they found absolutely no trace of him. And I think it was like around 5:30 p.m. is when the authorities began to help in the search too, and they had, I think, over 1,000 people searched for him for 5 days. And this ranged from, like you say, military choppers, which they have that night vision, people on the ground with tracking dogs and ATVs. And this is, in a lot of these cases, it goes with too, they all of a sudden the next night they have really bad weather. And the next night it was raining, and it gave them, you know, of course, slowed down the search for him. But with night vision, all these searchers and dogs, they never heard a single response or a call back from this little boy. I mean, there was no signs of abduction or foul play either. Now, 5 days later, which is around the time when they usually call off the search, a volunteer searcher found the boy's body along this Forest Service Road 240, which is about 8.5 miles away from where he was with his mother when they were chasing butterflies and grasshoppers. Now, there was no details about his death that were released right away, but this one site that I found, and I don't know if it's 100% accurate, okay, but it said that there was like like they did this, like this result, which it kind of pointed that he mostly...
Preliminary results?
Yeah, that he probably most likely died from environmental exposure. But that wasn't a, you know, full detailed of, they didn't do like a full autopsy thing yet or whatever. They just assumed that he basically died from exposure. But they were thinking that he probably walked along this road, walked off the road about 15, 20 feet, and then decided to lay down on the forest ground and go to bed. That's what they claimed. They said, well, he left his mom, walked down this road, got tired, decided to lay down, and he died right there. But they said the boy, you know, he was fully clothed. They didn't see any signs of foul play. They didn't see any reason why he should have died. You know, so they just assumed maybe it was because he was exposed to the elements. But to me, this is one of those another odd cases of a person disappearing right in the presence of another person. And the cause of death, again, being, you know, basically say, oh, this must be because of exposure. But the fact is
Did I hear you right? Did you say that while he was walking along with his mother, he just
disappeared,
decided to go 15, 20 feet into the forest?
No, you did not. No, you're not listening right. You're not listening right. I said he was playing, him and his mother were 100 yards away from the campsite with 20 people of family and friends. Okay. And the mother and the child were chasing butterflies and grasshoppers. He was right there with her. She turned her head for a second, turned back. He was gone. They were screaming and hollering from instantly right away. There should have been no reason why they didn't find him. There should be no reason why he didn't respond back to him. There should have been no reason why he got 8.5 miles away without anybody finding him before these 5 days had passed. But 5 days had passed, and they found him as though he was just neatly laid. Like, what they were saying is, like, he must have just walked down the road, got tired, and took a nap and died. That's what they were saying. Now, This happened in August of 2015. This makes no sense. This is one of those odd cases again.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. He was right there with his family. She turned her head for a second. He was gone. And they were right on it, searching for him. And for him to just, you know, there's no sign of foul play. There's nothing, no bruises, nothing on him to show why he would have died. And how he ended up 8.5 miles away with not even a single trace of these dogs or helicopters or anybody finding him until the 5th day later, some random person found him. Maybe the random person, I don't want to speculate, but it just seems odd. But how did he disappear that quickly?
That sounds like an abduction almost.
By what or whom, who knows? But this is weird. But it shows that there was no foul play or anything else. It just didn't make sense. And this just happened this past August. And she was right there with him. And we're going to post a link in YouTube so you guys can go. There's a website that shows the area, shows, the clearing in the fields of where they were at, what kind of forest and what kind of area, what it looks like, or where he disappeared. It's just one of those things that just seem weird,
Right.
Let's go to the next case. We're kind of speeding a little bit, but me and you have a lot of cases to kind of go through. But this is, again, one of those odd cases, and they do these a lot, missing for one, and this is just recently, that there's no reason why this should have happened. And there was no foul play. Nobody was assumed for murder or anything else. They just said, well, I guess he just died of exposure. And they just said, we're done dealing with this, which I'm sure the family is still trying to push for more on this because it just recently happened.
Well, I hope they find closure.
Me too.
I really do.
Everybody does when it comes to these cases.
All right, especially children. Paul Fugate. Now, this is another ranger story. And this one is truly a mystery. This man has been missing for over 30 years and nothing has been found. No gear, no personal items, and no body. At 2 p.m. on the afternoon of Sunday, January 13th, 1980, 41-year-old Paul Fugate left the headquarters of the Chiricahua National Monument in southeastern Arizona. Now, he was going to check the trails leading to the Faraway Ranch, which was a 400-acre parcel of land that had been recently acquired for the monument area. Now, according to the seasonal ranger, the seasonal ranger was left in the office alone, and he said that Fugate was wearing his uniform and badge, and he instructed the seasonal ranger that if he did not return by 4:30, that the seasonal ranger was to lock up and go home. Mm-hmm. Now, Fugate left and was never seen or heard from again. The authorities, along with the search and rescue team, searched a 17 square mile area of rugged terrain around the monument area, but found no sign of Fugate. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. The case was turned over to the Cochise County Sheriff's Department. Now, an acquaintance of Fugate supplied the only lead in the case. He stated that he saw Fugate in uniform and slumped between two men in a pickup truck. And under hypnosis, this guy was able to describe the truck and the men. Now, Paul Fugate was a nonconformist who was always pushing the boundaries, especially with the NPS. Mm-hmm. In late 1970, he had been dismissed from duty for, among other things, his long hair and handlebar mustache.
So they basically didn't like this guy because he pointed out things that things should be changed, or this isn't right, we should do things better, right. And they were like, you need to be quiet and do what we say type of thing.
Exactly. And Interesting. He was a nonconformist. He did things his way. But he was very good at what he did. Now, after a 6-year battle with the Park Service, he was reinstated in 76 with back pay and benefits restored. But during the 6 years, he spent time studying botany at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and he was considered very knowledgeable on the subject.
Of plants and wildlife. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Now, the Park Service declared Fugate missing and posted a $5,000 reward for information, and his family matched that amount. And in addition to this, the Park Service began to make partial salary payments to Fugate's wife, Dodie, who was a scientific photographer at the University of Arizona's Lunar and Planetary Laboratory. However, in 1981, the director of the Park Service's Western Region, Howard Chapman, reviewed the case and decided that Fugate voluntarily abandoned his position and dismissed him. And in turn, he demanded that Fugate's wife return the $6,900 that was paid to her plus 11% interest. You know, even banks don't charge that amount of interest.
I don't mean to laugh, but these guys are kind of jerky, you know?
Yeah, they are jerky. But later that demand was changed and they put a lien on Fugate's retirement funds. Now, Mrs. Fugate hired an attorney to fight this, stating that the Park Service had to call for a dismissal no later than 20 days after the disappearance in 1980.
Right.
And since it was 19 months later, the dismissal was illegal. Now, the attorney, Deborah Hillary, also sought an injunction against the Park Service because they were trying to change Fugate status from missing person. Steve McLaughlin, who was a friend of Fugate and who now headed a group called Friends of Paul Fugate, called for the FBI to be called in. And the group was also raising money for legal fees and a private investigator.
Mm-hmm.
They were upset that the government did not look outside the National Monument grounds for Fugate. And in fact, they felt that no real investigation had taken place. McLaughlin, Mrs. Fugate, and others believed that while out checking the trails alone, Paul had stumbled onto either a drug deal or smuggling, and since he was wearing a uniform and badge, that the criminals believed him to be Border Patrol. Now, this scenario is plausible because the monument area was 60 miles from Mexico, and the area was often used for these illegal activities.
Right.
Now, Jack Davis, who was acting director of the Park Service's Western Region at the time, just simply noted that there was lack of evidence of foul play, and the sighting by the acquaintance was questionable because the vehicles had passed each other at 50 miles an hour.
I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, he stated that the sighting was just a fleeting glimpse.
Right.
And not only that, a John Kleineck of the Phoenix FBI office stated that he looked into the circumstances of the case and he could not find any reason to believe that the FBI had jurisdiction. So I guess the fact that it happened on government land was not reason enough. Well,
yeah.
Mrs. Fugate stated that if he were a Navajo woman's missing dress, that the government would most certainly investigate, but she stated that the government just did not seem to care what happened to Paul.
Well, yeah, this is one of those really strange cases where you don't really know 100% what happened to him, but there seems to be oddity in all ways, but it seems to, I don't know, there, from what you're saying, you kind of want to assume that it was almost like an inside job.
I know, because like I said, this guy was a nonconformist, and it really, reading into this, there really wasn't much of an investigation.
It's like they didn't care. They're like, and then some guys like, I mean, this has been going on for 30 years now. The mystery of what happened to him.
Yeah. This mystery has been going on for over 30 years, and nothing was found. I mean, what happened to Paul Fugate? No one knows for sure. But from what I got from his story, the authorities didn't care what happened to him, and nothing, absolutely nothing, has been found. But maybe someday an unlucky hiker might accidentally stumble upon his remains.
Right, but this is a thing that's weird because there's this guy who's like, oh, well, maybe I saw him slumped over between two other guys. Did he maybe come across illegal activity? You know how sometimes people like to have
that
pot
area was
growing
a
areas.
Smuggling route for drugs. And it was also an area where illegal drug deals took place.
Right.
And it's most likely that he did stumble onto that.
Or he found something that the Park Service or some of the people who were working there may have been involved with, and they wanted to silence him. This is one of those strange cases where you're just not quite sure, but to me this seems like some type of criminal activity of afoot, be it somebody in the Park Service who worked with him, or he came across something, if in fact this is true, that he was seen in this truck between two guys.
Now that acquaintance, that's one that got me. It was positive that he saw Fugate slump between those two men, and he even under hypnosis described the truck and the men.
But that doesn't guarantee that's who he saw. that doesn't guarantee that. I mean, even under hypnosis, you can easily
Well,
be.
he could have been positive that's who he saw.
But you could still be under hypnosis easily suggestible into certain things. You don't know
I
what
understand that, yeah.
type of activity happened prior before this man went under hypnosis, and why was he used to go under hypnosis to prove this point. You know, this is a case again where it's an oddity. We really don't know. But to me, this seems, from what you were gathering and from a lot of people who were complaining about and seeing on the internet, that it has to have been some type of foul play, either within
I think it was.
service of the people that he knew, that he worked with, or he may have possibly stumbled upon something he shouldn't have.
Right.
You know, but this is, again, nobody really knows. We don't know what happened to this guy.
Yeah, because they found absolutely nothing. They found, well, for one thing, he was just going to go down and check the trail. He wasn't really going to go off any distance. They didn't find any gear. They found absolutely nothing. They didn't even find his body.
Mm-hmm.
Dogs couldn't pick up on his scent. And that was about the only real investigation they did, was bring out dogs. They didn't do an air search.
Yeah, this seems weird because this is somebody that's on their team. This is your brother in uniform. I mean, you're supposed to back up the people you work with. It's like a loyalty type of thing, just like the police, the firemen have to army, military type people have.
And then wound, so to speak, you know, they demanded that his wife pay back all that money that they gave her.
Yeah, that was weird too, and kind of shady. I mean, what is wrong that they would do that?
Actually, if they'd have just not paid anymore and then let that matter die about the money, his wife and friends probably would not have gone as far as they did on this. But I mean, even to this day, this woman is still trying to find out what happened to him.
Well, yeah. I'm going to pop over to the next couple of cases because, you know, we have a bunch still. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, I found some cases of missing Boy Scouts. You know, actually, there's a lot, all right? Not just a couple. I mean, there's, like I said, the amount of research we did and the numerous of cases that go way back, you know, and this is not, we weren't finding them in national state park forests and those people's possession. We could never track the missing people that went there. We found this through the national missing databases where family and police or whatever put into the records. But who knows how many cases we don't know of, you know, that seem to not be in these things. But this is where we got to because we typed in keywords to find who's missing in these areas, what park, whatever, and that's how we came up with it. But I found Geoffrey, Hague, and this other boy, well, I'll say in a minute, but they both have like similar cases. They're both Boy Scouts missing in different areas. Now, Geoffrey, he was 16 and he was like an Eagle Scout. Now, he disappeared on the Appalachian Trail about 3 miles east of the Newfound Gap atop of the Smokies. Now, it was said that Jeff was with some other people. He was with a guy named Stephen Wolf, another kid named Lee Smith, and then their scoutmaster, Eugene Smith. Now, they were all camping in a shelter on the trail Saturday night. Now, the next morning, they hiked back to the Newfound Gap, and Jeff was kind of a little bit tired, so he stopped and rested a bit on the trail as the others went ahead of him. And they went, because they were almost right there towards the gap where they had the car, you know, the parking lot, end of the trailing there where they could go to the parking lot. So he was just resting a little bit. And as the two boys and the scoutmaster waited a bit for Jeff at the car, they became concerned and they went back to find him. Well, there was no trace of Jeff at the no trace of him when they went back there. And authorities were called in and a massive search began, and it lasted for more than a week. With, you know, of course, we have tracking dogs and several people aiding in the search, and they couldn't find trace him down, you know. And they knew Jeff was kind of equipped for the temps there because he had, you know, red wool pullover cap, he had a corduroy jacket, you know, blue dungarees, some brown boots, a backpack which had food, matches, a sleeping bag, and extra clothing. So he could prepare himself because he's an Eagle Scout for overnight stays, and they've already been traveling and camping on and off the trail, so he knows and been to take care of himself for at least a few days. But as the days passed by, they hadn't any luck in finding him. And it was a group of volunteers that, after so many days, they finally located Jeff over 2 miles away from the trail that they were originally on February 8th, which is really weird because all he did was sit down. All they had to do was keep following the trail right back down to the parking area. And it wasn't until they came across, well, the thing is how they found him is they came across Jeff's knapsack, extra clothing, and food, and they were all placed on a neat pile on the boulder. So,
wow.
Did he fold all his stuff up and set it right on top of a boulder 2 miles away? Did somebody else do that? I don't know, but when they began to search the area around his items, and it was about a mile from his items, that's when they found his body. Now, they claimed there was no immediate indication for the cause of his death. And I'm not sure if this is like 100% correct, but there was like this other site that claimed that the Boy Scout Jeff was found dead in a drainage area, and his socks were missing, and a boot was off, and his shirt was on, but his pants were unzipped and partially removed. This was from one site, so I'm not sure if that is legit or somebody's adding to it and making it up. But on another newspaper, it was said that they did find footprints in the snow where somebody was wandering around a bit, and then they fell to their knees, but the tracks didn't lead them to Geoffrey, so they're not sure who those tracks belong to. But this is just another one of those cases that didn't make sense, and the person disappeared only a few yards from the people that he was with. Now, he just sat down for a moment to catch his breath. They only walked ahead of him. He wasn't that far. All he had to do was follow the trail going straight back down to them to go to the parking lot area of where the car or vehicle was parked. And for whatever reason, he didn't. He ended up being a few miles away. But why was all his gear neatly packed up on a boulder? And they don't even really know what caused his death. There's no foul play as far as they could tell. There was no injury or animal attack or anything. He was just dead. Why did he end up so many miles away when he just sat down for a moment and all he had to do was walk down the track? This is one of those things that I found strange again. Another one of those
very odd
cases. And, we're going to put links where you guys can go and read in more detail of the newspaper articles and the stories, But there was another case that I found that's kind of similar with this too. Now, this guy was 16. He's an Eagle Scout. He had wits to himself when it came to the Appalachian Trail, and he knew what he was doing out there because they've done it before, and he had all the proper things to help protect him from any element for at least a couple of days. Well, this next case that I found was a missing boy in Colorado. Now, this Boy Scout missing case he was 12 years old. His name was Jerald. Now, he was on a hiking trip with his troop in 1991 in San Bernardino, I can't talk all of a sudden, Bernardino National Forest. Yeah, my mouth's getting dry. But the group of boys, he was with a group of boys, and he was with his scoutmaster. And now they were hiking to the summit, which was about like 11,500 feet high. And at one point, one site claimed that Jerald became tired about 1,000 feet from the top, and he wanted to rest. So basically, the scoutmaster said, "Okay, Jerald, you just stay here at the exact same spot and rest while the rest of the group complete the hike." Now, when the scout troop returned, Jerald was gone and was never seen again. Now, at the time, Jerald was just wearing like a tan T-shirt, your basic green Boy Scout pants, and some sneakers. But he did have a 2-quart water container. He had a camera and some candy and some beef jerky or whatever, stuff like that. Now, the troop began to call out for Jerald, and the authorities were called in at one point, and they discovered matching shoe prints along the way. And they found items that belonged to Jerald, which was his backpack, candy wrappers, and some beef jerky. And at another point, they ended up finding Jerald's camera, which had several photos on it. And many of the photos, because they wouldn't have had it developed, many of the photos were just the landscape. But the last photo was a self-portrait of Jerald, of a very close-up of him. All you saw was like his nose and his eyes, and of course the flash went off. So obviously he took it in the evening time after he had been missing. And it says that, he had like it had an eerie photo. It was like he was scared or something. That's a lot of people claimed. It's published in this one newspaper. I couldn't find it at the time yet, but if anybody does, feel free to send us the message. We'll add it into the YouTube description. But the film, the food wrappers, and the early tracks helped basically the rescuers kind of narrow down their search area to the South Fork of Whitewater River, north of where they were at. Now they had all these volunteers. They had horseback, they had choppers with infrared monitors, they had all the same stuff, the dogs, everything, and they couldn't find a trace of him. They could only find his gear, his camera, and that was it. Now, of course, the guys who were in the choppers with infrared monitors, they saw tons of wildlife with infrared, but they never located his body or anybody maybe who had taken him or anything. But during July, this was in July, so they believed that Gerald would at least survive for several days without them being with other Boy Scouts, because the weather wouldn't cause him to die of exposure type of thing, very quickly or whatever. Now, they never did locate him, and he's still presumed missing and in danger. And like I said, the last photo taken was a close-up of him, and many people think that he looked scared, and they think that it happened in the evening hours after he went missing. But there are other sites that say that he had fallen behind the other scouts. He didn't say, hey, can I stay here and rest? But actually, he was still keeping up with him. He just kind of fell behind a little bit. And he just never arrived to the summit. But search teams searched that whole area, and they never did locate him. And he's never been seen and or heard from again. And
So they never even found a body.
Right. Or nothing. They found all his stuff in his camera and everything, and he took a picture late in the evening, but he should have been right there with the stuff. But there's in the area of where he disappeared, there wasn't any huge areas where he could have fell off really too much. They would have seen him. They just don't know what happened to him, and there weren't really any signs of an animal attack, or anything. But I mean, there is a possibility of cougars and big mountain lions and stuff in that area. But I don't know. I don't know if he asked to stop and take a rest, or if he just fell behind, because there's two variations in this story. But I just wanted to mention them both. But both of these cases of these two Boy Scouts missing is odd in itself as well.
Well, absolutely. They ended up missing around other people, so it could have been a cougar. I mean, they've been known to just run out and snatch up a kid. At 12 years old, he couldn't have been that big. But it just seems that they would have found something.
I know. Do you want to do another one?
Okay. Katherine Van Alst. Now, this is an example of how your child can just disappear when you're not looking.
But there is oddity. This case is very strange.
There is oddity to this.
I'm sorry.
But it's
not easily explained. It's kind of odd.
It's not easily explained because even it does have a happy ending. But it was in June of 1946. 8-year-old Katherine was playing in a backwash with her brothers by a dam in Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the family was from Kansas City, Missouri, and this was their first visit to the park. And when the boys returned to the family's rented cabin, they were alone. Now, their father immediately went out to look for Katherine, but he couldn't find her anywhere. And so the authorities were called and a search was organized. And for 6 days, this search party scoured the area and called out for her with no luck. So finally, on the 6th day, just when they were about to give up, one member of the search group, a student at the University of Arkansas, named Porter Chadwick, he came upon this cave and he called out for Katherine and she answered him. Now she stepped out from this cave where she had slept for 3 nights and just smiled at him, and she was taken to the Fayetteville hospital and examined. She still wore her bathing suit. She was barefoot, and all of her exposed skin was covered with insect bites. Otherwise, she was unharmed. And when they asked her what had happened, she just said she went for a walk in the woods and got lost. And she had, this little girl, for 6 days had lived on wild berries, and just about anything she could find. And this was not the only cave that she went into. One cave she started to go into, she said she saw this crawly thing with a lot of legs, so she wouldn't go in that one. She just kept on walking and stumbled upon this other cave, and for 3 nights she slept in this cave. And she said the whole time she wasn't afraid. So, but she was released from the hospital after a couple of days of rest. But this is just another one of those stories where, she just disappeared and nobody noticed that she left.
Well, the thing is, there's a website that we're going to put a link in the YouTube description, and you guys probably can find it after the show. Just click on it. I think it's already there, actually. But you are not, I don't know, I'll be adding it soon. But there's this guy who went to a lot of these places in the Missing 411 book, took pictures where it's interactive pictures where you can go down the whole entire way of where these people were missing, where they went missing from, where they ended up finding them, and there's more detail in the writing and everything else. And this case is kind of weird because she was just right there. She disappeared. She walked down that way. There's no reason why they shouldn't have found her sooner or anything else. And just, I don't know, the story's got a little bit more detail than what you kind of said, and I know we're kind of...
Well, at first they did think she drowned.
Right.
Because the day before, she had fallen off the dam. It wasn't a very big dam. But she had fallen off the dam, and this woman that had seen her jumped in and pulled her out.
Yeah, but
and told her to be more careful. And because of this, of course they, searched that lake because they thought maybe she had drowned and her brothers just didn't notice she was missing.
I don't know. There's a lot more to this. I remember reading it.
Yeah.
But there is some oddity to this too. It's just kind of weird. But she did fine for being a little girl. It's kind of weird. I don't know. She must have had,
for an 8-year-old, she did great.
She either had some holy intervention that was help protecting her or whatever. I don't really know. But there is more to this story. There's a little bit more oddity to it, and we're going to put the link on the YouTube or whatever. But this one's kind of a better outcome. But this is one of those stories where the kid's like, well, I don't really know what happened to me, but I'm okay. I don't.
Yeah.
She didn't really know why she ended up where she ended up. She's one of them. She couldn't really explain it. It's just like, okay, that's weird. But she fared well, and it ended up being a better case out of most of the incomes. But do you remember that one recent one that just happened here not that long ago with Geraldine Largay? And we saw it on this they have this TV show where they have like Maine game warden show. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Northwood's Law.
Right. She was even featured on there. And this one's kind of a strange one, but because she's like that missing hiker in Maine that she went hiking on the Appalachian Trail in 2013. Now, there was no clues as to where or what happened to her, and they had like this massive search party. Now, kind of to give a quick backstory for those who don't know this, Geraldine was a 66-year-old experienced hiker on the Appalachian Trail. She's hiked this trail and many other ones for a long time, so she knew what she was doing. But she had set out on April 13th from Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. As she hiked her way through the trails, she would meet up with her husband, George, off the trail for restocking of her supplies, and she'd stayed in touch with him via cell phone and text messages. Now, she was less than 200 miles from completing her 900-plus mile second half of the Appalachian Trail. So she had been hiking for a good, a long time anyway. She's about almost to the end.
I think she'd been on the trail for a month or two.
Right. She only had 200 miles left out of 900, okay? Now, she had texted her husband on the 21st, letting him know she was heading to Saddleback Mountain. And on July 22nd, she sent him a message telling him to meet her in the Wyam Township, which was at the southern end of the Bigelow Preserve, and on Wednesday, July 24th, for resupplies. So she's like, they would always correspond back and forth when to meet and all this other stuff, okay? Now, the 24th message of July was the last time he heard from his wife, and she never arrived at that destination. Now, on July 22nd, Largay was spotted by 18-year-old Trevor Pike of Tennessee somewhere between the Spalding Mountain and the Poplar Ridge lean-tos as he was heading south on the Appalachian Trail. Now, some papers said, like newspapers, said that she was last seen on July 22nd where she had talked with two women at a lean-to, which is a sheltered stopping point. Now, she planned to hike 8 miles north that day and then continue the next day to a point where the trail crossed a road, and that's where she was supposed to meet up with her husband for restocking, and she still had some items on her. But on July 25th, the Maine Warden Service and about 130 volunteers, the U.S. Border Patrol agents, aircraft, all-terrain vehicles, search dogs, horses, they all fanned out along this trail, which shows the map stuff here, and I'll blow it up in a little bit, but they basically fanned out all along the area in an 81 square mile search, and at one point they were even using shoulder-to-shoulder search through many of these series of grids, but they didn't find anything of her, nor any clue to why she disappeared. And they eventually called off their search for her, and no one knowing what happened to her. Well, recently, her remains were found on October 14th of 2015. Now, she was discovered by a contractor conducting like this forest survey as part of an environmental impact statement for the U.S. Navy property in the Reddington Township. Now, they claimed that she died of exposure and or lack of food and water, so said the autopsy report, which I thought was really weird. Now, she was found in a wooded area about 3,000 feet off of that trail where everybody was searching, and it was about 2 miles away from where she was last seen in July of 2013. Now, it was said that her cell phone was with the remains and was examined by the Maine State Police Computer Crime Lab, and according to this information that I read, it said information found on the cell phone concluded that Gerry reached the Orbiton stream and the discontinued railroad bed crossing in the late morning of July 22nd, 2013, and shortly after reaching that intersection, she continued north on the Appalachian Trail, and at some point, they believe she left the trail and became lost, because that's the only information they basically got from her cell phone. But where she was found was over a half a mile from the trail on land owned by the U.S. Navy. Now, on July 23rd, they said they had bad weather, which made searching for her hard, and the tracking dogs and stuff. But when they were searching stuff with all these tracking dogs, the dogs were actually in that same area where she was found, and they speculated they were only 50 to 100 yards from where her skeleton remains were found. So there's no reason why she shouldn't have been found then. But the area where she was in, it was searched really good. They had shoulder to shoulder searching. They had all these dogs. There's no reason they shouldn't have found her body. Why was all of a sudden she just found there 2 years later? This is one of those odd, and they just said, well, I guess she died because she ran out of food and water. Why would she go over there, sit down on the trail, and then just die? They didn't say she died of a heart attack or anything like that. It's whatever. She just basically died from lack of food and water and exposure.
All they found of her, though, was a skeleton. How do they know that? They're just guessing.
I don't know. I'm just telling you these oddities of what they're saying, and I think there's some point that you might be able to find more detail on the autopsy report. But the areas that she was in were clearly marked, and she'd been trekking for months. She was already, only 200 miles away from completing 900 hike along the whole Appalachian Trail. She knew about this trail. She knew all the markings. She knew how to read it, how to do it. She had a map and everything. Right. And for her body to be found as she died because of lack of food and water and exposure in July and found in an area that was searched seemed like one of those cases I felt like sharing because it seemed a little odd to me. Well, yeah.
I remember this case. I remember this case being on that show. And how they supposedly searched for her and everything. And it even showed them
bringing in the cell phone people to ping her cell phone and everything, and they had tons of people, and they even had helicopters with the heat-seeking thing and everything else, and they were searching the area that she was in. Why did nobody or anything find her until 2 years later? And she was found on the U.S. Navy survivalist land because they use it for training and this and that and everything
Right.
else. And it's property. And everybody says, you know, you go up and down these trails, everything's clearly marked. There should be no reason why she ended up there. And why did she just die of lack of food and lack of water and exposure when she still had, you know, she claimed at one point that she still had food and water up to the point where she was going to meet her husband. She never let herself run to the point where she'd have absolutely nothing. And there was no
In these shelters along the Appalachian
the
Trail,
lean-tos. Yeah.
the lean-tos, they're kind of like resting places where people who hike this trail, you know, they can spend the night there. And there's a book in these lean-tos, you know, that when people come up there, they sign, you know, put their name in the book, and they know that, well, that person was there. Well, her name was in the first book in the lean-to, but the second lean-to, they said that was in a dead zone where there was absolutely no cell phone signal.
Right. I can't point very well, but on one point you see, here's the part where the lean-to where she was last seen, and she just basically went da 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 da, and she was final location was right here where she was found. They were searching all of this. Why they didn't find her till 2 years later baffles me. And then they started coming up with some random excuses that I was reading on the internet, and I'm like, here we go again. Why? This is so weird. You know, it doesn't make sense to me. You know, I don't know.
It doesn't. This was a woman this was not the only time she hiked that trail, but I think it was the first time she had gone so long on it, you know, was going 900 miles on it. But she was an experienced hiker, and she, you know, I mean, and the trail is clearly marked. How did she disappear? How did she end up 2 miles from where she was supposed to be? And how, going shoulder to shoulder on a search, how did they miss her?
Or having the thermal cams that should have hit her body heat or just found the body or anything. I guess, okay, yeah, you got a lot of wood stuff and a little bit's hard, but somebody at some point should have smelled her or come across her or anything in those couple of days.
Right.
Or they should have still pinpointed her phone. It seems, this is another one of those that I thought, this is strange. It should be added to, again, one of those odd cases when it comes to people disappearing in national parks, forests, and stuff like that. You know, we're not speculating, or we're not saying like, oh, aliens did this. We're not saying Bigfoot did this. We're not saying a serial killer did this. We don't really know, but there are people out there that, you know, have belief in these type of theories. And, you know, is it a possibility? Yes, there's always a possibility, but we don't know. But we found that these cases were really strange and should be mentioned. But I just have a feeling we'll probably do more shows like this because we've come across so many missing these cases that there's a heck of a lot even more stranger ones that we want to talk about. And some of them we didn't mention tonight because we're going to talk about it when we do, what's that Bigfoot show one called again? The Dark Side of Bigfoot.
The Dark Side of Bigfoot, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a show coming up really soon called The Dark Side of Bigfoot, when people have supposed kidnapped or attacked or bad encounters when it comes to Bigfoot. And we found a lot of cases, children cases, talking about them being taken by, as I guess you best could describe as a Bigfoot, but we didn't want to say them tonight because we're saving them for that show coming up really soon in a couple of weeks. But
well, David mentions in his talks and books that many common factors in cases, same patterns occurred with each of the missing persons, such as repeated instances of missing people being found in areas that were previously thoroughly searched.
yeah, they also had search dogs who can't find the victim's scent.
Right, and David reported that the cases don't show evidence or disturbances that would be associated with animal attacks or a crime scene, which search and rescue dogs would typically uncover.
You got repeated instances of people missing clothing being found folded up neatly on a trail that just was gone over. Victims found without shoes a lot of times, but their bottom of their feet have no show that they'd been hiking or doing anything without their shoes.
Right, and victims who are found seem to have some kind of medical or psychological condition that affected their ability to speak or communicate where they disappeared to, or they can't recall what happened, or simply just do not want to talk about what happened to them ever.
That one's kind of interesting. That one I found interesting because that happens in a lot of the cases that I was looking into. But these people who have handicaps and everything else and disabilities and stuff, and they're being found, and they were with family members, and they're being found way, way far away. But for whatever reason, they don't want to talk about what happened to them or anything. That's another one of those ones, you know, and we're saving some of those stories for, like I said, the Bigfoot type thing. But that's another one of those odd ones, too.
Yeah, and victims being found in a creek bed.
There's other ones that we were coming off where people, these are repetitive ones when it comes to the odd cases too, where they're playing with their dog or with their dog and they disappear together and they leave together, but the person's gone and the dog comes back.
Right, and inclement weather hits the area at the time the victim disappears.
All the time.
Each and every time, just about.
Every single time, all of a sudden, it's some kind of rain or something happens with these odd cases or whatever else. But you know what? Nature happens. We know that too. But this seems to be a reoccurring theme too. They always have this intense week-long search followed by media coverage. But after a week, 1 week, maybe even sometimes just 5 days, they conclude the search, it's called off, it's ended without another word about it or about the disappearance. There's no records kept of the search effort by the Park Service or the federal government, nor are there anything kept about how many people are missing.
Yeah, and some of the missing persons were armed. Some had had locator beacons, and none of the people in the cases ever had both.
Yeah, here's the thing. Why weren't the people found with the locator beacons? You know, there's a lot of these odd cases where they found all their clothes, all the items and everything, and you can say, okay, well, hypothermia, or, you know, bad weather, winter, you know, if you're near freezing to death, a lot of times your body goes into a weird condition, and then you just taking off all your clothes, and the same thing if you get overheated too, I think, right? So I mean that kind of makes sense a little bit, but the whole clothing thing. But in these certain cases that we're going to do more shows on this, and with the next Bigfoot one, you're going to know it's going to be more weird. But kids go missing, and they're found, but not only a long distance away, but they're uphill at the top of cliffs and mountains, where even a normal person can trek through that quickly in that great of a distance without being hurt or marked up or anything. Now, typically, if a person's lost, or even a kid, their behavior, according to the SAR, the search and rescue experts, they go downhill. You don't go uphill. Why would they, like a 2-year-old, 5-year-old, 9-year-old, or even somebody who has a disability, traverse through all this stuff and not really be marked up? And then most of them, when they are found, they can't either talk, like you were saying, or they can't remember what happened to them, or they're so freaked out they don't want to tell what happened to them.
Right, and children are often found naked or semi-clothed, either covered in scratches, and there are others that don't even have a single mark on them.
I know, and if you think about it, for some of these cases, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, like I'm saying, for a young child to walk for miles, climbing thousands of feet in steep terrain in the wilderness. And, you know, you think about being exposed out in the elements, and they would have at least a considerable amount of abrasions, or most of the time when they're found without their shoes on and the bottom of their feet, like I'm saying, they have absolutely no scratches, no marks, no condition, like the one girl had all the bug bites. These people don't have bug bites, so they're not sunburned, they're not overly dehydrated. It's almost like they're in perfect condition, you know, like.
Yeah, and you know, to walk these great distances in forests, mountains, deserts, to be in such great condition, I mean, the implication is that these children were carried to wherever they were found, disappeared, and then found in places where they should not or could not be. In one case, a kid turned up 12 miles away, 19 hours after he disappeared, with numerous fences and creeks and 2 mountains between him and the place he disappeared from. And many adults could not have walked that far over that kind of terrain in that amount of time. I'm pretty sure I couldn't.
I know.
I have trouble walking to the mailbox.
I have trouble walking up the stairs sometimes. I just trip up. I mean, who doesn't trip up the stairs at some point, you know? But to go to these cases or whatever, in all these cases, the parent says that the child was right behind them too, or right next to them, you know, when they disappeared. And many of these disappearances occur in a very well trafficked area from campsites, etc.
Well, many victims disappeared during daylight hours with others around them, friends and family.
Yeah, even the adults too, for sure. But okay, a lot of the cases that we were reading, missing or found dead, the cause of death is usually their general given is they died of exposure or dehydration, but they have no clue why they died, so they just write up in there, well, I guess they died of exposure. That's their way of brushing it off with these strange cases.
Well, in several of the missing people's cases, Green Berets were brought into the search efforts, and even though military officials maintain that Green Berets would never be used in a civilian search on U.S. soil.
That's a weird one too, and why some of the cases
they didn't even was really strange.
Why they didn't even work with the volunteers at the time there, and why they bringing them in, and why weren't they sharing each other's information too? That's another oddity I found when it came to when the Green Berets and stuff became working in, because I think it has to be with they must have got into something, and they shouldn't have been there, and it's a government type of thing, and they don't want the regular people knowing about it, but.
Right.
You have kids who say that a bear cuddled them all night and kept them warm. And in one case, a bear supposedly gave berries to a child. Now, anybody who knows a bear, this is not their typical behavior. They're not going to snatch up a kid and be like, hey, let's go home and I'm going to call you George, you know? But
they shouldn't have laughed at that.
But, you know, neither do they tuck the child under their arm and take off running with them either. Bears can't do that, you know.
That actually sounds like Bigfoot.
Well, and those cases we're saving for the Dark Side of Bigfoot that we're having in 2 weeks. We have another show coming up, Haunted Forest first, and then we're going to do the Dark Side of Bigfoot after that. But we're saving a bunch of these weird stories, missing cases that have these people talking about having encounters with a bipedal wolf creature or a bear that was taking care of them, you know?
Yeah, well, in his books, David never really alludes to one thing or another, but it seems that he is presenting facts. For example, you know, where someone disappeared, what they were doing at the time and what happened. Mm-hmm. You know, he doesn't really suggest, but allows the reader to make up their own conclusion. Now, Raven and I are not suggesting that there are not many cases in these areas that are not caused due to the inexperience and lack of knowledge and dangers that it can occur while visiting national forest parks and deserts.
Right. I mean, because that happens. There's a lot of that happening too.
Yeah.
That we didn't bring up because you basically know that's what it is. But when you have millions of people who have never been exposed to the outdoors and these extremes, they usually can come, most of the time they come unprepared. They have no maps, they have no prior knowledge of these areas, they're totally relying on their cell phones to guide them or for help. Now, they don't realize when you go into these national forests, state parks, wetlands, deserts, and what have you, there's a lot of dead zones, people.
Right.
Your stuff that you use nowadays to guide you, to get you wherever you want, ain't gonna work, okay? So you can't just be like, you know what, I'm gonna go trek off into this, I want to connect with Mother Nature, and just have, like, your coat, and shoes and clothing on, that's it, and your cell phone. It's not gonna work. You're going to get hurt. Something's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Now, people go hiking off on these trails, and sometimes they split up, and they can encounter many things. You can get hurt, you can fall, you know, you could get disoriented, you could run into wildlife, okay? We are not the top of the food chain, and no matter what somebody tells you or anything else, you go out there and you're in their world, a world that we do not know. And even those who train and are claimed to be expert survivalists, even bad things can happen to them, you know?
And not having proper clothing and gear in their day packs. And,
Right.
And if and when they get lost, they're not prepared for the elements. And most of the time are exposed to hypothermia.
Right.
You have several cases of people having heart attacks,
Right.
lightning strikes,
Right.
fatal falls, altitude sickness to suicides.
Oh, yeah.
Even at times, people stumbling upon illicit, illegal activity is happening.
Right. I mean, millions of these people who venture into these areas, you know, parks and forests, they're not accustomed to the dangers of the wilderness and the wildlife. And just because you are in a state or national forest with some paved roads or campsites, it doesn't mean there is no danger.
But like David and
His missing 411 guy, yeah. But it's book.
David
Paulides.
Paulides.
Yeah.
And others. It's the strange cases of these missing people that really stick out. Why is the MPS not keeping records or supposedly keeping records of these missing people?
That's the weird thing that I was talking about. You know, why are clusters of people vanishing in the same area for eons? I mean, we don't know. I mean, we have theories that vary with bizarre clues or lack of. You have the Bigfoot. You have nature elements. You have time warps and portals that people are talking about. You have, like you said, illegal activity to even ET experiments and abductions to government cover-up by authorities regarding these disappearances. You know, there's people who talk about underground military bases there. And we touched a little bit with this on some of our UFO topics that we talk about.
Right.
You know, we like to talk about a lot of stuff. Doesn't mean that we're saying this is all true or whatever. We just find some of these things interesting. And, you know, it's just kind of, you know, stories or what have you. Some might be real, some might not be real. But, you know, is there something out of the ordinary going on that is causing all of these bizarre cases ones? Not the normal ones, but the different ones. We don't know. But if you do plan on visiting any one of these national parks, forests, or monuments, me and Spooky's advice would be to educate yourself, bring the proper gear, talk thoroughly with a game warden or park rangers for tips and tricks before you venture out to where you want to go to. And most of all, stay safe and educate yourself before you're heading out, you know?
Okay, I want to thank everybody that came in to listen and stuck with us as we went overtime.
About 10 minutes, not that bad.
Yeah, that's not bad. I want to thank our mods for doing such a good job, and everyone that came in to chat. Join us January 26, 2016, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, as we talk about
haunted forests.
Tune in as we banter about stories of ancient
haunted
tales and folklores to paranormal.
Yeah.
As we talk about haunted forest.
Right. We're gonna do, I think, like the suicide forest. Another one in England.
Suicide forest in at the base of Mount Fuji in Japan. Haunted forest in Romania, Essex, England.
Yeah, we're gonna do a couple of those. That might be a multiple show too, or whatever. But this again might be another show that comes up because there's so many other cases we wanted to talk about, but we couldn't get it all in a 2-hour show. But I just want to thank you, everybody who came in. For those of you who haven't, please subscribe to our channel. And if you like the show, give us a like and share us with others. And hopefully we'll see you guys next week too. And thanks, Spooky, for doing the show with me. And thank you to the viewer who did suggest this as well.
That's right. That's right. We do try to get to your suggestions. We do research them. We, look into them. And we may not get to them right away, but eventually we do. We have a long list of topics that we would like to get to.
Right. But, thank you again for everybody for coming. And, like Spooky always says, subscribe to us and share us on any media outlet that you use. And we'll see you guys next week.
Good night, everyone.